Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us for AI and the Media, part of the Burns Center for Social Change's Rebooting Democracy in the Age of AI lecture series, which talks with innovative designers, thinkers, and change makers working to do democracy differently in the age of artificial intelligence. Conversations explore how machine learning, natural language processing, and generative AI can enable more participatory and inclusive ways of solving problems. Through online and in-person conversations with pioneers like Ethan, working to democratize power in government, schools, and workplaces, our conversations aim to address how to use new technologies to strengthen democracy. The Burns Center for Social Change at Northeastern University develops innovative, participatory, and equitable approaches to solving public problems using new technology. The center is led by a growing team of accomplished and recognized change makers. Please learn more and sign up for future events at rebootdemocracy.ai. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by not only a change maker, but a visionary, my friend Ethan Zuckerman, who is the Associate Professor of Public Policy, Communication, and Information at UMass Amherst and founder of the Institute for Digital Public Infrastructure, a research group that is studying and building alternatives to the existing commercial internet. He's the author of 2 books, Mistrust, Why Losing Faith in Institutions Provides the Tools to Transform Them, and Rewire, Digital Cosmopolitans in the Age of Connection, and the co-founder of the global blogging community, Global Voices. Ethan has worked at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, the MIT Media Lab, and Comparative Media Studies at MIT, Geek Corps, and Tripod. For those online, please see Ethan's full bio to the chat. We're going to spend about 30 or 40 minutes talking amongst the two of us.
Jill, are we going to introduce you?
I will. I'm not shy. I'll get to
because I was going to do it otherwise.
No worries. We're going to spend the first 30 to 40 minutes in discussion between the two of us, and then open everything up for questions. And we're going to try and get to as many of those as possible. So who am I and why am I here? I'm Jill Abramson. I'm a journalist. I've worked as both a reporter and editor for an embarrassingly long time. It occurred to me this week because of the New Hampshire primary that the first New Hampshire primary that I covered was in 1976 when I was working for Time magazine. In a world of print and no web and very few women political reporters too. So I've been in journalism a long time. For 17 years, I had the top editing positions at the New York Times. I was the Washington bureau chief, the managing editor, and then the executive editor. I was the first woman to hold any of those positions, which was interesting and occasionally thrilling. And after I left the Times in 2014, I turned to teaching and joined the faculty at Harvard University, where I taught 2 journalism seminars a semester until a year ago when Northeastern came knocking on my door, and I decided at my youthful age that I needed a change. And, I'd heard great things about the university, and everything I heard has turned out to be true. And so I teach one journalism class here And then I'm affiliated with the Burns Center, where I'm working on a number of projects, some of which include solutions journalism, how we do a great job of shining a spotlight on society's problems, but not so great a job in leading people to information and understanding about what might solve these problems. And this year, I'm focusing on AI, which for me is kind of new territory. So I'm really happy to be with all of you, and I couldn't be more thrilled to be reunited with my friend Ethan. It's been a while. I met Ethan in the early 2000s when everything about journalism was beginning to change because of the web. And I was panicked. In 2003, I moved from Washington to become managing editor of the Times, so it put me in charge of the whole news report from sports to politics to fashion, science at the Times. And the only thing I had ever thought about is what stories are going to be on the front page of the newspaper the next day. But suddenly, NYT.com was where the action was. And I didn't know anything about the web. And I had to get a fast education under quite a bit of pressure. And where did I go? I went to a conference that Ethan was hosting at the Berkman Center at Harvard, where for the first time I heard the word blog, bloggers, and blogging. And from that moment, I just was fascinated and want to learn as much as I could about the digital world, and ended up, after I left the Times in 2014, I actually wrote a book called Merchants of Truth about the digital transformation of the news media. And Ethan was generous enough to invite me to come speak to his colleagues at the MIT Media Lab. But I think that's the last time we've seen each other. So it's great to see you.
Yeah, there was a good long time where they weren't letting you back into 617. So there was, you had to go meet me in Worcester or something like that.
Well, it's great to have you back in 617 and here in Boston. We even referred just at the beginning of our offline conversation to a pretty formative article that an academic from NYU named Clay Shirky wrote in 2009. And the title of what he wrote was Thinking the Impossible. And the impossible for the news was that newspapers were clearly going away. The business model, advertising especially, that had supported newspapers forever was cratering. It was being blown up. And, anyone who worked at a newspaper, including at the New York Times, was fearful that they were going to lose their job and our profession was somehow going away. And the point of this article was, calm down, everybody. Yes, we may have to think the impossible, that newspapers are not going to be the dominant way that people receive the news, but that does not mean that journalism is going away and is losing its importance. And Shirky argued that the web offered a wonderful opportunity to democratize news and information, and that social media opened up whole new vistas for journalists to engage directly with their readers and their audience, and that there's more promise in that than peril. And Shirky called it a Gutenberg moment, after Gutenberg, who discovered and brought the printing press into existence back in the 1500s, late 1400s, which meant before the printing press, the only people who could read or own a book were wealthy people who employed artisans to make illuminated manuscripts. There was no general interest books until the printing press. And Shirky's argument was that the web was offering us another Gutenberg moment. And so my first question to Ethan is AI another Gutenberg moment?
Yeah, so I went back and reread Thinking the Unthinkable. Based on your suggestion, it's a great piece. I've taught it in the past. Shirky's big point on it is that when you hit these moments of transformation, things break faster than you can put new things in place. So it feels like everything's falling apart because existing structures are breaking down, but in fact, new structures are coming into play. And we've seen this in journalism.
So what are they?
So we've seen this in journalism, and the New York Times is doing very well right now. There are a number of projects that have found ways to find, whether through voluntary support or community support, some ways to keep journalism going. The flip side is no one's going to make an argument that organized journalism is a particularly financially healthy business at the moment. We are clearly not entirely through that Gutenberg moment. And the core issue, which is how do we have the facts about what we need to know about the world, has not been particularly well resolved, as I think we're about to find out during this upcoming election. So where are we on AI? Here's two visions of AI and news, one very happy, one very unhappy, and I will give you the punchline, which is that they're both true. So people who are maybe most excited about AI right now are computer programmers. If you are a computer programmer, you spend a lot of time saying, okay, here's what I need to do, and then translating this idea of here's what I need to do into this incredibly precise technical language so that the interpreter or the compiler can understand how to do it. It is tedious, it is painstaking. Almost all of us do it through a search engine and reading Stack Overflow and so on and so forth. And what's really great now is you can go to ChatGPT or any number of other things and say, I forget how to do a bubble sort. How the hell do I do a bubble sort in Python? And it spits it out. And it's actually right about 99% of the time. And what this means is that we're ending up with programmers who are cyborgs. They are part human and part machine, and they're vastly more efficient than they otherwise would have been. So an optimistic version of this is we are in the presence of, one of the fathers of data journalism. Matt Carroll is sitting here. He was able to crack open the pedophile priest scandal in Boston through the creative use of a spreadsheet to track how priests were being moved from one parish to another. And this turned out to be one of the great data stories of all time.
It's a great scene in the movie Spotlight.
So, Matt had to do an enormous amount of fussy data work that he was really the only person at the Boston Globe at that point capable of doing. Imagine the world with a whole bunch of hyper-empowered Matt Carrolls able to throw an amazing array of tools and techniques. And so that's the happy version. Here's the unhappy version. Siri, tell me today's news. Sure, what's going on in the world today is the following. I don't have any way of checking whether that's accurate.
Or the time.
It's not credited to the people who actually did the reporting. I can't research and think about what their strengths and weaknesses are in their reporting, whether I trust them or not. And the people who actually went out and did that reporting for the New York Times, NPR, Washington Post, so on and so forth, are not compensated. And I have no way of checking the accuracy associated with it. So both those things are happening simultaneously, right? People are running really, really fast to create bots that help us navigate this complicated world. And you'll find many people out there saying, I would so much rather get my news from my smart speaker by asking a couple of questions than actually going and reading. Right. And at the same time, we have this possibility of hyper-empowered better than ever before. So I'm not willing to do a sky is falling Shirky moment. We're at a very particular point in the hype cycle. We're pretty early on at it. We're specifically at the congressional investigation point of the hype cycle. It's the moment in which everyone decides this is so important that Congress has to go piss all over it. But we have not yet hit the point of sort of understanding which of these is going to come into focus. When we start getting to the point where a substantial number of people are turning to AI bots for their news, that would be a great moment to panic. And if we can head off these problems of hallucination, crediting, footnoting, so on and so forth,
Or
before
error.
we get there,
Or
that would be
false news.
a great thing to do. At the same time, I want to make very sure that I do not prevent the next generation of Matt Carrolls emerging, because we live in a really complicated world, and trying to sort through the amazing amount of data to figure out what the real stories are, that's going to require this sort of cyborg empowerment that is the upside of this.
How do we try to influence events so that the Happy Valley version of this, or something closer to that, comes to pass?
We are blessed and cursed by the economic model that we live in America, which
Capitalism?
is late stage capitalism, and particularly venture capitalism. So we are in this frantic rush to demonstrate that hundreds of millions of people can be using generative AI. So let's talk about what generative AI is and what it can do, right? Most of us have encountered something like ChatGPT. You feed ChatGPT a question in human language, and you get a lot of the time
A very comprehensive answer.
pretty good answers coming out of it. Those pretty good answers happen in a very simple way. They're predicting one word after the next. And they're able to predict one word after the next by ingesting this entire massive corpus, trillions and trillions of sentences scraped off the web. And they're able to deliver from that something that looks a lot like coherent text. Some of the same stuff happens with images. You can say, give me an image. It will very similarly extrapolate from hundreds of billions of images on the web and try to give you something that sort of comes out of it. This is both amazing and also deeply problematic. It's amazing because for certain types of questions, it's really very good at it. If you're asking a question that is well answered by Wikipedia, it's probably going to do a pretty good job of giving you an answer. If you're asking a technical question where it's likely that that reference exists online, you're probably going to get a very high quality answer. It's also very problematic. It's problematic because it gets things wrong. It hallucinates, it makes up details.
Give a little footnote,
Sure.
An anecdote on this is that probably a year ago, which is the first time I was fooling around with ChatGPT, I just asked it, I said, can you give me a biography of Jill Abramson? And quick as lightning, out came, it was sort of like a Wikipedia entry. It was, I was almost dulled as I read it because it was so accurate. And then like 3/4 of the way through, I read, and she wrote a biography of Sandra Day O'Connor. I did not write a biography of Sandra Day O'Connor. It's just like, what? And, so I became awake. But
So let me build on that for a moment, because I did a set of experiments around biographies on ChatGPT. ChatGPT is actually, this is a wonderful way to test ChatGPT. And the way to do it is to ask for a biography of someone you know well.
like me.
So I started, I obviously did bios of myself, I did one of my ex-wife, I did one of other professors that I work with. So a couple of things that have happening. One is that we all got upgrades. So I am undegreed. I have a bachelor's degree from Williams College a long time ago. I never finished a master's, I never finished a PhD. But according to ChatGPT, I have a master's from the Kennedy School at Harvard, and I have a PhD from MIT Media Lab. Now, those are reasonable guesses to make. I am a tenured professor. Most tenured professors have PhDs. I just don't happen to have them. So it'd be more plausible in some ways for me to have one than not have one. Here's what happened to a lot of my colleagues. They ended up winning big awards. One of them won the Nobel Prize in Computing, which is really impressive because there is no Nobel Prize in computing. But here's another thing that happened. My dear friend, who is also my ex-wife, found herself married with 2 kids. And this was a real shock to me. I mean, we have 1 kid together, we're non-married, but it turns out that that's pretty common. So why is that? If you're talking about your family in your bio, you are rarely writing, Ethan is lonely and lives alone with a disinterested cat in a disused apartment. You're usually talking about your happy family, which might be the wife and 2 kids. Here's the final one. About a quarter of the people who tried this experiment with me found out that they were dead. Because one of the most common ways that you get a biography is an obituary. So this is what's called hallucination. The thing you have to understand about generative AI is that it is a plausibility engine. It is completely plausible, Jill, for you to have written a book about Sandra Day O'Connor. That is a plausible thing. If I had not read your Wikipedia article and you said, my book on Sandra Day O'Connor, I would have said, I haven't read Jill's book on Sandra Day O'Connor. It would have been a particularly plausible thing to have that. But plausibility is really different from what we want out of the news. We do not want news to be plausible. We want it to be accurate. And it's going to take a while to get from plausibility to accuracy. So here's why this isn't so worrisome in computer programming, right? I can say, give me a bubble search, and it will give me something, and it's plausible, and then I can test it. And if it doesn't run, I know that it doesn't run. And I can say, it got it wrong. Let me try it a couple of different ways. Let me tweak it. I think the syntax is wrong. I'm going to make it work. But it's really hard when you get into something like news. When you say, wow, I'm behind deadline. I need a column for Alan Rusbridger over Prospect. This is a real situation, by the way. I need 1,200 words for Alan Rusbridger on the legacy of the Macintosh in the 40th anniversary. And if I take that straight out of ChatGPT and hand it over to Alan, that's a real problem. Because generative AI will generate something plausible, which will almost certainly have inaccuracies in it. And then Alan has this really interesting challenge. I am an expert. He is not.
Right.
I'm handing him something that should have my expertise on it. So we have to figure out how these generative systems are counterbalanced by expertise, like a programmer's expertise or by a reporter's expertise, so that we harness them in a way that's helpful.
So, do I have time? We have time for one more, or before we? Okay.
It's about maybe 10 minutes, and then we can start questions.
Great.
Yeah, it's 5:25. Good point.
Ethan, I want to ask you about your work on kind of developing what I think of as an alternative internet that would preserve the great things about the web, but rid it of some of the poisonous sort of abuses that we all know about in social media and other parts of life on the web.
So
How's it going?
let's talk about this in the context of news. We talk about news as something that's essential for democracy, and it is. But it's actually one of several things as far as an information environment that's essential for democracy. If you go back to the founding of the US, we actually have the combination of a robust press and a mechanism for circulating it through the post office. But we also have really robust social institutions for people to talk about what's happening in the press. You have everything from Ben Franklin's junto, where you have a bunch of middle-class guys, small-scale merchants, laborers, tradesmen, getting together one day a week and giving discourses about the issues of the day. You have town meetings where people are experimenting with standing up and talking about how they feel about things. You have structures like coffee houses and taverns where people are reading the news of the day and sort of talking about That, to a large extent, is what social media is now. Social media moved into that gap decisively during the pandemic. Whatever we were doing to have face-to-face contact moved into online spaces, but it's a long process that folks like Bob Putnam have been talking about for a long time.
Bob Putnam, by the way, is the author of a famous book called Bowling Low.
And Bob has been very worried that because we're not members of bowling leagues or the local Elks Lodge or so on and so forth, we're not talking with people anymore, and we're weakening our civic fabric. So you, as an acclaimed journalist, are very used to worrying about the future of news to have an informed populace. My take on this is, yep, absolutely, +1, with you all the way. I'm really worried about our conversational spaces. I'm really worried that not only do we not have good information about the world, but the places in which we talk about that information, we make up our minds, we make decisions, are really bad and really unhealthy. And they're really bad
And are far from universal. Like there's no common source.
There's no common space, although that's true in the news space as well. But more than anything else, again, this sort of comes to the economics. If you are Facebook, you need people to spend as much time on your platform as possible.
And never leave you.
So that you can have them view ads. And the way that you do this is you emphasize strong emotion. You put forward anger, you put forward controversy, because that's what people react to and that's what people pay attention to. And it's very much how television news ended up becoming all crime all the time, or crime and scam busting, and white girls getting kidnapped.
The ethos that Ethan is describing is commonly called, if it bleeds, it leads.
So we've ended up with a version of if it bleeds, it leads in social media. But our version of it is a little more subtle, because we're only ever seeing our own version of it, right? What's great about TV news is that we all get to see it and we get to say, hey, that's really weird that they're spending 20 minutes of a 30-minute report on crime, and crime is actually down. It's much harder for us to see on social media. It's much harder for us to see what we can. So social media is important. We need spaces where we can talk to each other. But these spaces being controlled by massive corporations who have an incentive to optimize for anger, high engagement, that is not a good recipe. It turns out social media is not hard to build. Building a space where a bunch of us can say, here's what's happening in my day, that's really easy. Mastodon's a great example of it. It's an open source server, it's very, very easy to do. The problem is, it's much, much less interesting. So you can build social media that is an alternative. It's not governed by the algorithm, it runs under very different rules, and the truth is you will not pay any attention to it. And I know this to be true because I've been running different experiments around this. I've been doing...
And why is that? It's just dull or anodyne or...
The people who participate tend to be people who have an axe to grind. You don't necessarily get the same network effect. So here's a very concrete example of this. We started a website for Amherst called Small Town, and we tried to get people to talk about local Amherst politics. And different iterations of the experiment have gone off the rails in different ways. We've either ended up with super angry people, with their axe to grind, or we've ended up with almost nothing to talk about and people sort of falling away from the platform. This doesn't mean it's unsolvable. I actually think the future of social in many ways is small communities, but it's small communities with a purpose. So I'll give you an example of this. I took up running for the first time at the age of 50 as a severely overweight man. And I started running with a group called the Slow as Fuck Running Club. And Slow as Fuck is run by a guy named Martin Evans. He is 6'3", 340, and he's a marathoner. And I find him pretty inspiring because I'm now down to about 275. But, the fact that he's out there running at a bigger size than me, I find very inspiring. And so here's this community. It exists online. You can only join this community if you agree to the rules of the community. One of the rules are you don't talk about body image. You don't talk about weight loss. You talk about what your goals are. You talk about where you're trying to go. It is explicitly a supportive community. There's all sorts of things that you have to sort of agree to be part of this. That's a super healthy space. And I'm seeing these healthy, small, focused spaces come up. The problem is you have to remember to go to them. You have to remember to engage with them. One of the things we need is social media needs to be more like the web. You can go to Wikipedia using your web browser. You can go to the New York Times using your web browser. You can go to Northeastern using your web browser. You don't need a different piece of software for each of them. Right now on your phone, you go to Facebook, you're doing it through the Facebook app. You go to Instagram, you're going through the Instagram app. You go to Twitter or whatever the hell it's called now, you go through X. You need a way to be able to rope those things together. And you need a way to make them interoperate and interact with them. That's what we're working on. So we are working on self-governed communities, and we're working on tools that let users subscribe to a whole bunch of different communities and control how they see them. And this actually requires you to have three things. You have to be able to run your own social network. You have to have a client that can interoperate with a bunch of different social networks. And you need a friendly local algorithm store. You need the ability to sort of say, actually, put my friends at the top of this. Or, you know what, I'm really focused on my running right now. Put anything Martinus says, put at the top of this, slow as fuck goes at the very top of my feed. You need to have that sort of control. All of this stuff is being built by fringe academics, hippies, but none of whom are particularly well funded. And we're up against Facebook and Google and so on and so forth. And so here's the thing, right? So if we really drill down on this question of how do we fix news, my answer at the end of the day is public media matters a lot. We're not real good at it in the United States. Thank goodness we now have Catherine Maher taking over NPR. Right. But still, compared to Europe, compared to Japan, compared to a lot of other places, we are deeply underinvested in news as a public good. We haven't even thought about social media as a public good. But you know what? You need it in the same way that you need news to have a healthy public sphere. And so the very lonely quest that I've been on lately is trying to demonstrate that you actually can build healthy social media. It just takes time and effort, and you might need to invest it, and you might need to use taxpayer dollars to build it, because you're not going to get it out of venture-backed companies because they have no incentive to do it.
Well-intentioned billionaires.
The well-intentioned billionaires are starting to run into real barriers. We're seeing real barriers with Bezos and the Washington Post.
Right.
We have the same thing with social media. We have a well-intentioned billionaire out there running something called Project Liberty. It's been going for 5 years. There's $100 million in it. It hasn't produced any software yet. And it's based around the blockchain, which means that we might as well just burn down whole swaths of the rainforest every time we want to make a status update. And that's where the money is in that space right now. We need to think about how we cultivate our public sphere.
Should we open it up to questions?
Well, I think you can start now. So why don't you start from the audience here?
Okay. Don't be shy.
It gets real quiet when people don't ask questions. Hey.
Hi. Hi, Jacob.
How's it going? So what does a kind of prefigurative view look like for journalism? Like when we think of this small community model, like how can journalism kind of learn the lessons of building a healthier public sphere while still being financially viable?
So I think we are seeing some experiments with community journalism that at least have some promise behind them. The versions of this that we tend to hear, we hear people talking about the Texas Tribune. I tend to talk a lot more about Black radio in Philadelphia. I sort of look at So the community radio stations that have managed to sort of find traction in their communities, ethnic media, particularly minority language media, has some really good and also some really bad lessons. We have a project right now at UMass where we're studying hate in Asian American communities. And it turns out that Vietnamese language media is thoroughly dominated by far-right conspiracy YouTubers. So you can have real positive and real negative things come out of these communities. One of the examples that I point people to a lot at this sort of intersection between news and social is Front Porch Forum, which is a Vermont-based project. This project is now 24 years old. It started as an email list in a particular neighborhood in Burlington, Vermont. It turned into a statewide project. And critically, it's never grown beyond a statewide project. It covers one community in Massachusetts, 4 communities in New York, and all the rest of them are, all the different towns in Vermont. And it's a remarkable connective technology for news information. The vast majority of what happens on it is totally everyday, quotidian. I'm selling snow tires, do you need them? But every so often, really interesting thing comes up. So I live just south of Williamstown, Massachusetts, which is a college town on the border. It's the one Massachusetts town that's part of Front Porch Forum. I ended up seeing a post on Front Porch Forum saying, hey, we're gonna work to resettle Haitian refugees in Berkshire County. Anyone want to help out? I ended up responding. I ended up joining a team run by the local congregational church. I am now the financial sponsor of the family
and you
for Haiti.
started their running club.
Well, that's coming. So there are amazing ways that these projects could work. And the amazing thing about Front Porch Forum is it's for profit. It's fiscally sustainable. It is not a big business. It has a turnover of about $450,000 a year, but it succeeds. It's found a way to do it. And that ain't nothing. So these things are doable. Here's the rub. Things like social media, the sort of things that I'm exploring, require software. Software is hard. It's expensive. It takes time. It takes investment. Yes, we can build micro communities around existing tools, but the building of the tools is surprisingly hard to do. We haven't found a particular way to do that well. We also find ourselves bumping up against marketing. We have enormous amounts of hype and such. Like all of you who are on TikTok had to hear about TikTok before you ended up getting on it. And that had to do with PR and marketing and all sorts of things associated with it. How do we end up pushing people towards sort of alternatives to all of this? We need to think about what the economics are of how we build the tools, how we draw people towards them, if we're gonna end up sort of building alternative spaces.
Yeah, the economics often, after starting something with lots of promise that you see as a real contribution to democracy. I'll give you a quick example. At the Times, I was very supportive of an initiative and a sub website we created called School Book, which had all of the data about the New York City public schools by school district. And we developed a system where getting community people, citizens, to contribute news about their schools, we found a way to certify people as accurate posters of news about their schools. Now, information about your kids' schools is a very good commodity. There's a big audience for that information, and it went great guns for about 2 years, but then there were some financial problems at the Times, and the editor left, and before you knew it, it was gone.
So can you imagine reviving something like that in a semi-automated fashion?
Yes.
What if the Matt Carroll of the future is designing a generative AI that's able to scrape some of the basic data, present it in a good way, and then humans are contributing the rest of it. Does that become a viable way to do it?
It does,
do we
but-
experiment with tech if we're
Just getting back to your point about the sort of corporate mindset that we still work in, which is, yes, you could, and if I was still at the Times, I'd be very supportive of that. But in terms of resources to do it, I'm competing against, the Times runs this, it's award season right now. You all saw the Oscar nomination. It competes directly with, a social site that the Times does about movie, music, and other awards, which has a much bigger audience and which the Times can monetize. So those are just the dims to breaks of working within a capitalist system.
let's get some prompts from the room for
Jonathan.
In addition to creating our army of Matt Carroll clones, are there any other things that you can see concretely where AI could help newsrooms, either community newsrooms, which are springing up everywhere, kind of, and trying to figure out how to go, all the way up to, the Times, the Post,
Yep.
and international publications?
Yeah, so cyborg Matt Carroll clones, just to be completely clear about this. So weirdly enough, one of the places that people are having enormous amounts of success with generative AI is content moderation. So one of the things that's been really tricky for journalism is opening it up to the community. And everybody wants to have comments, everybody wants to be the center of a conversation, but then that turns into an absolute nightmare. And so I've been going through this very hard work of sort of going around to European public broadcasters and saying, you know what, you should really run your own Mastodon node, stop sending people off to Facebook to talk about your programming, run your own community. And someone always says, no, never. Like, that's miserable, that's a horrible thing to do, why would we ever choose to do that? It turns out that might be a thing that AI turns out to be very good at. Again, you probably don't want to turn it over 100% to it. You probably want to say, here's the obvious stuff that's spam and abuse and so on and so forth, and automate that part of the process. And then you want to have, a sensitive space where people come in and try to figure out how to mediate and sort of work towards it. But I feel like that's a space where journalism has really turned away from space, where AI could end up being helpful. I think a lot of the other stuff that I'm hearing, like, let's find a way to make sure that every Little League game has an automated report on it, I am not particularly enthusiastic about, because I actually think the biggest problem that we're having right now, which we really haven't talked about yet, is the explosion of unreliable, machine-generated, unuseful content. There's actually been some good scholarly studies done recently suggesting that Google is less useful than it used to be, that actually its quality starts falling. It's because so much AI-generated spam is out there that even Google is having difficulty keeping up with it. So one of the things that we're going to need news to help us do is navigate an increasingly polluted environment. It's possible that AI may be a useful tool in doing that, but for now, what AI is doing is making the problem much, much, much worse. Yeah. So what I would say is, as a general rule for that, if we can figure out how to use machine learning, I'm a tech guy, I would rather say machine learning than AI, which is a really vague term. If we can figure out ways to use machine learning to filter out the manipulative, the automated, and actually get to the core quality information, that's how I would be doing it if I were, working at the Times right now and working on R&D. My focus would be not how do we generate more text, that's actually not the hard part of it. How do we filter this increasingly noisy
Well, I
environment,
think that
starting with
the
comments.
Times' strategy has always been, how can we maximize the unique, high-quality information that only we provide?
As opposed to trying to provide everything for everyone.
Do we have
We have some
Zoom
questions online.
Yeah, go for
Let
it.
me start. This is from Ralph Cleef. So if we used to have newspapers to bridge free press and conversational spaces through letters to the editor, with the newspaper editors as the algorithm to select the timeline, are apps now newspapers?
So it's interesting. We always come back to letters to the editor because it's one of the very narrow channels of
Although
feedback.
it correlates to comments, articles that are related to comments in some way.
I think people always come back to letters to the editor because it's a way to turn a broadcast medium into an interactive medium. I think what's so interesting at this moment in time is that we actually all have different ways through which we can get heard, right? I can write to the New York Times and try to get a letter to the editor published in the Times.
Yeah, the ratio of
it's a crap
accepted letters.
I have a much better thing to do, which is I go on Twitter, or I go on my blog, or I go any number of other places and say, did you read this bullshit that the Times has come up with? Or maybe I'm funny about it. Maybe I start the New York Times pitch bot to make fun of the patterns that the Times does again and again and again. So I think what I would say is we have so much richer channels for talking back to the media than we used to. We still have problems of people getting attention and getting voice. And what's interesting is it's different constraints. It used to be the editor deciding which of those letters to the editor and a project. Now it's some combination of algorithms and the public deciding we're going to pay attention to this particular response to it, we're going to pay attention to this particular piece of it. It's a much more interactive system, but it's a much more chaotic system. We don't have nearly as much predictability about where we're going to go. And one of the things that I would say in this is editors, if they're honest about things, understand that they're always doing agenda setting. They're always saying, we're going to talk about this.
By choosing what
Right.
to publish.
Agenda setting now is happening in this really unpredictable way. It's happening through some combination of what the algorithm picks up, what someone says that's really, truly interesting and clever, and what media is putting out in the first place, because we can't really have a very intelligent conversation about Turkmenistan because we don't report on Turkmenistan. So you're probably not going to end up with that in the first place. But it's so much more complex and chaotic than it was a generation ago.
Any other questions in the room before we go to another one online?
Yeah, please.
What would you say the line between plagiarism and AI generated is? And kind of, how do you protect against just a bunch of content being on these platforms that if people knew it was made by AI, they wouldn't be as interested? Do you think you should have to say your work was made by AI?
So let's start by talking about some research that's come up recently, because there's been a bunch of really good work done on this recently. There's a study that came out of UC Santa Barbara along with people who work on Amazon Web Services. And they tried to make a guess at what percentage of the web is AI generated. And the way that they did it was pretty interesting. They started looking for sentences that have been translated into multiple languages. So if you can find a sentence that looks like it's been translated into 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 languages, there's a very good chance that what that is a spam farm. Someone writes a text in English, maybe they write it by hand, maybe they write it with an AI, and then they use machine translation to translate it into different languages. It turns out for smaller languages, for Bulgarian, Hungarian, stuff like that, more than 50% of the content on the web is machine translated. So more than 50% of the stuff out there is already automatically generated spam. So that's one thing. Second thing, friend of mine, Kai Chen Yang, he helped run a project called Bottom over at University of Michigan. This was a project that, until Elon Musk shut it down, let you look at an account on Twitter and determine whether it was likely to be a bot or not. He recently found a set of bots that were basically undetectable. They looked like they had real pictures. They looked like they were producing high quality content. The only way he could find these bots was occasionally they would say, I'm sorry, as a large language model, I'm not allowed to do that. And so what this was a family of 1,000 bots that were taking prompts into ChatGPT, coming up with original texts, and putting them out. And they were using it to promote cyber currencies. But they're gonna be using it to promote political candidates. Like, it's guaranteed you will be seeing that in this election cycle. You will see fully synthetically created social media. So in reality, already here, already pervasive, we're already drowning in shit. And no one cares, right? Like, there's huge teams at Google trying to figure out how to detect this, how to keep it out of it. But if you look at the research papers, people will tell you Google is losing that war. Where we end up fighting this war is in different spaces like academic spaces. So if you are on a university campus, and hey, you are, everybody right now is having a battle between, if you use AI, it's plagiarism, and it's 2024. Of course you're going to use AI. Just be transparent about it. And we're all trying to figure out where we are in that equation. You will probably not be surprised to find out that I'm in the use it and disclose it. I spend a chunk of my first lecture every semester talking about what AI is good at and bad at, and talking about how I recommend you use it and not use it. I did an experiment with this with my class this fall. About a third of my students declared that they'd used AI. I didn't see any evidence of better or worse work from them. I did find it very interesting that many of my best students chose not to use AI. I think AI is very, very helpful if you're working in a second or third language. I think it's an amazing leveler within a classroom around things like writing assignments. And I think if you're disclosing, I don't think I personally consider it to be plagiarism, but I'm part of a 25-person committee at UMass trying to figure out officially what we think. And so for now, I'm allowed to say, here are my rules, and you can do it because professors do that all the time.
Yeah, I'm
But it's a
allowing
big
it
debate.
on a specific assignment right now that the students in my investigative journalism class are doing related to January 6th and the January 6th report, which is voluminous and, you know, includes hundreds of depositions and interviews and video. It's a huge amount of material, and I'm asking each of the students to synthesize and present a different chapter of the report. And I'm letting them use AI because there's no way they can like read through and look at the footnotes even in the report to really get a handle on the full picture that that report maps out. So I don't.
Do you think people are using it in the newsroom that way?
Yeah, they're definitely beginning to use
I assume they are, right? I mean, we're all familiar with the notion of a document dump, right? We're familiar with this notion of like, it's 4:55 on a Friday, someone releases, 2,500 pages of something. I would assume that any competent newsroom is very quickly scanning, summarizing, so on and so forth. And so there are going to be ways we use these tools. I really think it's critical that we be transparent about them. I think it's really critical that we interrogate them, right? An interesting question over time is going to be, what are the biases built in the summarization algorithm? We should have people researching that. I would go further and say, it'd be really good if people in the government were researching that. That feels like really worthwhile stuff for us to interrogate and sort of spend time with. But we are going to use them, and I think not teaching our students to use them, essentially saying, I
This
think,
is a great tool, but you're not gonna learn
but
how to
here's
use it.
where it's strong, here's where it's weak. I think we have time for one more question on camera, and then we'll have time for more.
Okay, let me do one more from Zoom.
Yeah.
This is from Juan Pablo. Would you agree that the explosion of generative AI creates a much stronger pressure on public education systems to be better at developing critical thinking and specific habits and techniques of fact-checking in the population overall? Do you know of efforts that are being made in the US to address this gap?
So, yes, and so I think generative AI is a great wake-up call for something that's been true for many, many, many years, which is that you don't want to take anything at face value when you read it. And the truth is, I don't want to take the New York Times at face value when I read it, right? I want to understand that the Times and the Globe and the Post all have perspectives and biases and things that they're going to pay attention to and not pay attention to. But we have just cranked up the intensity of this to 11. And I think one of the things, the biggest thing I work with my students on, I teach an undergrad class called Defending Democracy in the Digital Age. And bizarrely enough, the biggest thing we work on is citation. We work on trying to figure out how to back up what you say with why you're saying it
And where
it's
the
coming
information comes from.
And the reason for it is that a lot of the ideas that define journalism, like objectivity, have really come into disarray, right? We now understand that, people have different perspectives based on their lived experience. I'm going to write about something differently as a middle-aged white dude than someone as a young Black woman is going to write about something. And this idea that we're being objective is probably not as helpful as sort of understanding that people are coming from positions, coming from lived experience.
And yet you have to be on guard to prevent a world where everything is perspective and there are no common accepted
And
facts.
we can work on being fair, we can work on being transparent, we can work on being documented. But all of that requires reading in a very different way. I learned to read at the end of the sort of pre-web generation. And there was a sense of, here are things that you can read and they are true and you can cite them. And it really wasn't until I was sort of getting advanced undergrad and into grad school that people were sort of saying, maybe you should question that. We are now teaching kids in middle school, because I have a middle schooler, that you want to be thinking about and questioning what you're reading, where it's coming from, how we're doing it. I do think there are smart people doing it. I think the librarians are almost always the best at doing it. The funny thing is the people who need this the most are you and me, Jill. The people who are failing at mis and disinformation, weeding out propaganda, are people over 50. They are not the kids. The kids are growing up in an environment where they understand in many cases that these things are not voices of authority, these are voices coming from opinion, coming from perspective. Near as we can tell, the people who are most vulnerable to propaganda and mis and disinformation are older. And we are not generally talking about, an internet driver's license for people over 50, and maybe the answer is that's actually where we should be focusing. So totally in favor of media literacy, totally in favor of teaching it in the schools, worried that what we actually need to be doing is teaching a very, very different audience.
So we're a little past 6 p.m. right now.
All right.
Anything you want to add in closing, and then we'll turn off the record?
All I want to do in closing is thank the audience, and mainly to thank Ethan, who just, for me, lifted my spirit just with the sheer command he has of this new world of generative AI. So. The Burns Center has 2 upcoming lectures that you should definitely come to. Tuesday, February 6th at 2 p.m., The Internet We Deserve with Larry Lessig, moderated by John Battelle, who's my colleague at the Burns Center. And on Thursday, the 15th at noon, AI and Democracy's First Principles, a virtual discussion with Sir Anthony Grayling and Danielle Allen of Harvard, continuing the Rebooting Democracy in the Age of AI series. So please do join us for those.
I'm not going anywhere, so if you want to hang out and talk more about this, we can go over, we can keep talking at the same time. People who need to go for dinner, people who need to go to things, please feel free to leave. We will not be offended or anything like that. But anyone else have questions or comments or topics that, yeah, please go for it.
I'm a great fan of